Hello, how is everybody? We have some wonderful guest artists. I'm going to introduce them, but it'll be a little bit of time before we have them talk to you. This is Chooi, our violin soloist. You may remember him. He's been here before. And this is Rueff Frazao, who's our conducting fellow. All right, have a seat, you guys. So this concert is really special because it's all unusual music. Now, the Scottish Fantasy is perhaps the better known piece, but of the other two pieces, has anyone heard those live before? Okay, so these will be Lehigh Valley premieres. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So the Amy Beach piece was actually written in 1898, and it was the first symphony by a completely American-trained composer and by a woman to be performed by a major orchestra in the United States. So think back to 1898 and what was going on in the world. Pretty remarkable. So we're going to talk about that piece in a minute, but let me start with how this concert all came together. So I knew that I wanted to invite Timothy back because he had won the shot competition. He had been here playing the Brook Violin Concerto. He blew us all away. It was just totally an amazing performance. And this is the 25th anniversary of the shot competition. And so I wanted to bring back some winners. So you heard Wittry, who came and played classical guitar. He was one of our earlier winners. And the other one I chose to bring back was Chooi. He went on from our competition to win the Joachim International Violin Competition. I think then you won second place in the Queen Elizabeth competition and many other competitions. Since there, he's been playing all over the world. So we are very lucky that he found time in his schedule to come back and visit us again. Yeah, let's give that a round of applause. So he sent a list of pieces, and the Scottish Fantasy jumped out at me as a piece that we hadn't done here. It's got a wonderful part not only for the violin, but also for our fabulous harpist, Fran Duffy. It's almost like a harp concerto along with the violin. And when you'll notice, we'll actually stop after the first piece and I'll talk to kind of cover the move, but the harp will move in and come right up close to the podium so that she can be right there. I can hear her, Timothy can hear her. So I had this one piece, and then I knew that we'd been doing a lot of pieces by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and I wanted to continue that because I really love his music, and I settled on the Bambula, which is a piece that will open the concert. So Samuel Coleridge Taylor, just to remind you, was born of an African father and an English woman. And he was raised in England, and he actually was sort of mentored a little bit by Elgar, so you might hear some influences of that in his music. But he was a fabulous composer, and the piece, he actually came to the United States 3 times. He had works performed in New York. He had actually a society named after him in Washington, D.C., because they loved his music so much. And he wrote the Bambula and utilized melodies, folk melodies from the West Indies. And he had written earlier a piece called 24 Negro Melodies. And he took number 8, which was called the Bambula, and developed that into an orchestral piece. Now, what I love about this is this folk element that he's utilizing, folk melodies. And the Bambula was also the name for an African drum. But you can kind of imagine people dancing. So all of these pieces on this concert are based upon folk melodies. There's also an influence of Dvorak, because Dvorak was in New York around that same time period, 1892, 93. So both Amy Beach and Samuel Coleridge Taylor were influenced and inspired by Dvorak's use of folk melodies. So for Samuel Coleridge Taylor, it was the African melodies, and for Amy Beach, she went back to her heritage, which was the Irish. So we're going to explore some of those. But first, I want to play a little bit of the piano version that he wrote first. Have that. Now I want to play the orchestral version. can hear where he got those melodies and how he changed it into this full orchestral color. So talking about folk melodies, in the middle of this, there's a beautiful solo by the clarinet and also by the oboe. And I love the way that the Amy Beach and also in the Scottish Fantasy, they utilize the colors of sounds, particularly the woodwinds, in creating these haunting melodies. So here's a little bit of the second slow melody of this. Isn't that a beautiful melody? So this concert is full of absolutely beautiful melodies. I think more than any concert we've done so far. So that work opens the concert. After that beautiful, slow, beautiful melody, we repeat that whole opening section and then it ends fast and furious. That's followed by the Scottish Fantasy. So the Scottish Fantasy is a piece, I'm gonna have Timmy actually talk more about it, but I'll just sort of set it up. And then we're gonna work our way through. It's in 4 movements. It's an unusual piece in that it's all based upon other people's music. In fact, everything on this concert is based upon other people's music. And that's why I love the combination of these pieces. Also, the interesting combination is the fact that even though Samuel Coleridge Taylor used West Indies and African-American type melodies, he grew up in London. So all of the pieces are focused on, England, Scotland, and Ireland. And even though the composers weren't necessarily all from those areas, we're concentrating on music of that style. And that's another combination. So Timmy, why don't you talk with us a little bit about the piece and then we'll work our way through. And I've got, I think, an example from each movement to contrast what you're doing.
Good afternoon, it's such a pleasure to be back here, and thank you so much for coming to this hour's conversation about the program. It's really exciting to play this piece, the Brooks Scottish Fantasy, or originally called Brooks, what is it, of Scotch tunes? Or,
airs and Scotch tunes. Or
yeah, and this is a work that is not performed so much by violinists because, first of all, it's extremely difficult. It's a very uncomfortable piece that was written for the violin because, and I was just having a conversation with Diane, that Brooke himself actually kept the original keys of where these folk tunes came from, and many of them are not really suited for the violin. The third movement, it is written in its original key of 4 flats, and usually for violinists, we're not used to playing anything more than 2 flats and 2 sharps, just by the nature of our instruments. But he pushes us as violinists to adapt to serve the music, and so forth in the last movement as well. He goes into many different keys that are very unnatural for the violin, but also what happens is it creates a very unique color that we don't see in much of the violin repertoire.
Yeah, and so each of the movements is, as we said, based upon one or more folk melodies. Should we kind of work our way through? Do we do it in order? So the first movement, there's a tune called Through the Woods Laddie. And we decided, actually, we're going to take you in the concert to Scotland. And we're going to be utilizing the shell with some visuals to kind of take you and put you in the right mood, kind of like a set for a play. But where words were available for some of these tunes, we're also going to give you some of those words on the screen. You don't even know this is happening.
I did not know this, no.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's going to really help set the mood. But it will sort of give you the character. So here's a folk version of Through the Wood Laddie.
Just one thing to add as Diane is finding this is that the thing about Brooke was that at least until he wrote and composed and premiered this piece, he actually never went to Scotland himself. So all of this was a fantasy in his mind as well. This was debuted with the Liverpool Philharmonic Society, now the Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. Actually, that's where I first played this piece as well last year. And it's so interesting just to understand his fascination with Scotland himself and taking all of these tunes and putting into a violin concerto. Sometimes got to ask why he did that, but it's so amazing that he was able to create a composition.
Great. Let's hope this is the right track. There we go. Now you can play how that comes about now. Then the next movement is called the Dusty Miller. There we have it. Yeah. So you'll see that during the concert, but I felt that would kind of give you a flavor of where the inspiration was for these. Yeah. So give us a sample. Isn't this going to be fun? No, it's really great. Then the third movement. So we might as well go ahead and we'll give them the slides. You guys get the secrets because you come here. The third movement is, the song is called I'm a Dune for Lack of Johnny. And so the first thing is, it goes, I'm a dune, I'm a dune, a dune. I'm going, well, what does a dune mean, right? So you will know, so you'll have to spread the word and tell your friends. It means I'm sad. I'm sad for lack of Johnny because Johnny's gone and left me, okay? So let's listen to a little of this. Beautiful. And then the last movement is the Scots-Wha-Hay. It's a poem by Robert Burns. It's the battle poem. And here's a folk version of it, actually sung in a tavern. So I have to explain that I had to alter the poem. It probably didn't match this song exactly because we don't have enough music in our piece for all the stanzas. So I had to drop 2 out, but don't tell anybody. But that's why it probably didn't match. But so this is more of a ballad version, and then Brooke really takes it in a different vein.
Much more virtuosic. So.
So that whole last movement, we sort of alternate with Timmy back and forth, and it's a really, really fun. And he has so much, what I call fireworks, virtuosic all over, sets of variations on this wonderful folk tune. So we're going to have time at the end for questions for Timothy, okay? But I want to go on and talk a little bit about the Amy Beach piece. So the Amy Beach piece, even though it was written in 1898, it sort of got lost and wasn't performed very much. And her music was, even though her music was published during her lifetime, which was unusual, but really not brought back until around the 70s or so. People started playing her music again. She actually lived until 1944. This piece, as I mentioned, was based upon folk melodies, and we're going to sort of talk our way through the 4 movements. Beautiful, beautiful melodies. It's just amazing what she was able to do. So she grew up in Boston area. To find my notes on her. And she was a pianist, and she actually soloed with the Boston Symphony early on. So obviously they knew who she was. They were following her career. She later on toured as a pianist in Europe. And this symphony was inspired by folk melodies. And there was a publication that was around in 1840s called The Citizen. It was published in Ireland, but it was available at the library in Boston. And we're pretty sure that she went there and found in this publication the writing of these folk tunes that she utilized in her music, because those folk tunes were available. So the first movement, however, was based upon a piece that she wrote herself, and it was called Dark is the Night, and it was a piece for piano and soprano. And let me see if I can find it, since all my numbering is wrong. Oh, I see. I went from 7 to 10. That's why. Okay. So this is a sample of what inspired her first movement. And we can actually find the first movement of the Amy Beach Symphony, and it will give you the words for Dark is the Night. And now we'll hear a little bit of the opening of the symphony. To me, I hear influences of Wagner, influences of Brahms, influences of Dvorak, particularly Dvorak. People have compared Amy Beach's first movement of the symphony in form and in key structure to the first movement of Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. So you could hear that quote from her other piece. And this rhythm, ba-ba-ba-bam, comes all the time. Ba-ba-ba-bam. And then she utilizes another folk rhythm, a folk melody. And let's listen to that. This is also in the first movement. Yeah, so that one, we don't have it on the screen, but the title is, I guess it's in Gaelic, because I can't even read it in the words that are, and I'm going to give it to you on the screen so you'll see it like that in the concert, but it translates as Conor O'Reilly of Clonish. But it doesn't look like that at all. But I think that adds a character, So that's the first movement. And then the second movement is called, it's based upon a tune called Gortin Ornoth, and it's The Little Field of Barley. So let's listen to just a sample of this. It's a beautiful melody, isn't it? And with rehearsals of this, I have to be a little bit careful because the second movement has, the wonderful oboe solos, but it also has an English horn, but the English horn only plays in that movement. And then the third movement, there's a bass clarinet, but they only play in that movement. And those two players don't play on anything else in the concert. And so with my rehearsals, I have to think, if they drive all the way, and if I don't get to that movement, they're going to be really mad at me. So last night, I thought of this, and so I said, okay, I got to make sure I do those two movements. But of course, then I ran out of time on the other movements. So then last night, we actually called the bass clarinet and told him not to come tonight because I'm not going to get to that movement again. And I didn't want him coming. I still have to pay him. But I didn't want him coming and then not playing a note, right? So these are little things that you have to think about as a conductor, because we're always trying to say how much time I can spend on each part of the piece. So then the third movement is based upon two melodies that she actually interweaves. And once again, I can barely pronounce it. Pais din Funin, which is called The Lively Child, and it's actually a child that's passed away. So you will know that, the other people will. I think I added a little text to the title in the slide to clarify that. So it's a sad, reflective tune. And then the other one is Chia an bilach an draishon si, something like that. Anybody from Ireland here? Good, that you don't know how badly I pronounced that. And that we have some text for that we'll be able to show at the concert. And that is more of a tribute piece, sort of to Ireland and what a wonderful country. And it's, it's called Which Way Did She Go? So it's once a talking about a woman. That's usually most of these songs talk about love. But I think it's nice when you get a little bit of the text and the character of what was the inspiration of these. So let's listen to just a little bit. I've got both of those themes. So the first one is the title I told you first, which was a traditional fiddle tune. So there were no words. So let's listen to that one. Yeah, so that was The Lively Child that had passed away. Very somber, but very beautiful. And then here's the other tune. And this is from the Symphony, the third movement. In the piece, when you hear it at the concert, you're going to hear how she weaves and overlaps these two melodies, so sometimes being heard at the same time. Yeah. So more beautiful melodies. I mean, it's really just a wonderful symphony. And then the final movement is all hers. Okay, so she didn't base it, but she does bring back a little bit of the character of the first movement. And it's triumphant and it's hard. There's some really, really tough stuff for the orchestra that we're still working on. And it's thick. And so for the players, it's an endurance thing. The trumpets are coming back saying, I really have to pace myself because nobody gets to rest. Everybody plays all the time. And for us, once again, this is a work that no one in the orchestra had played before. So we're all coming at it for the first time. And so everybody's trying to figure out, okay, do I have as my melody an A melody, most important, bring out a B melody, secondary, or C accompanimental? And once they understand this with their ears, everybody will adjust their dynamics. But when you look at the page, we all have the same dynamics. So we might all be forte, but then I have to clarify, okay, brass, you're accompanimental, bring that down to mezzo forte. Stay in what I call in the texture. Timpani, you're fortissimo, but you're topping the sound. So I say to him, stay once again in the sound, don't top the sound. So finding out how we navigate who's most important when all we have is a singular dynamic on our page and everybody has the same dynamic. And so as we go through the 4 rehearsals, the clarity of what's happening and who is with whom at what points comes through, and it makes it so much fun. So here's a little bit of the final movement. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor, and of course has this big, just builds and builds and builds throughout and builds up to this huge brassy ending that we just get to have a lot of fun with. So it's a really phenomenal piece that's not done very often, but we hope that it will become part of the core repertoire and that people will do it more often. So before we open it up for questions, I wanted to have our conducting fellow, Rueff, talk a little bit. Rueff is originally Brazilian in background, and he was a bass player. I met him at a conducting workshop that I taught, and he was actually, he works with a charter arts high school. Well, I'll let him tell you about that. But then he's gone back to school and is getting a master's from Oklahoma City University, and doing very, very well, and he's here to help out with everything. So Rueff Frazao.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here today. And it's a pleasure to meet you today, too. So, and as Diane said, I met her in Texas, in Arlington, for a conducting workshop, and has done so much for me and how I move. And we spent some time this summer in Czech Republic, and so that was a fantastic time as well. But currently, right now, I'm in Oklahoma City, studying with Jeff Grogan and getting my master's degree there. But I'm mainly a transplant, also from Florida, so we get a lot of snowbirds down there. And yeah, I taught orchestra for about 10 years and in the public school systems, and currently teach strings over at Rose State College in Oklahoma. So, oh, I'm also from Newark, by the way. Did my formative years there. So, yeah, and back when it was like the Portuguese and Brazilian festivals there. It doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. But that was because we just went through Carnival season in Brazil. So, yeah.
Good.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah. So as you may know, I think we're in our 12th year of our conducting fellow program, and I actually counted, and I think we've had 76 conductors come through our program, which is really phenomenal. Yeah. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for conductors to sort of see what a concert week is like with a regional orchestra of our size and makeup. And the schedule, how we put things together, meet some of our staff. Today, Rueff will join as Timmy and I have our meeting about tempos, and then I'm going to send him up to kind of observe the new music rehearsal that will be also happening this afternoon, and then he'll be here again tonight listening for balances. After every rehearsal, he gives me notes, because things up here sound sometimes different than what's out there, and also things go by so quickly that I can't stop for everything. And so if I have good notes from a conducting fellow, I'm famous for my cards, so I can write a little note on a card and I can say, okay, this measure, flutes, I need more. And I can give that to a player ahead of time and I can save a lot of time. What's funny is, my bassoon players, they call them love notes. I'll be coming and say, oh, you have a love note for me? And at the very beginning of this set, I actually was making a couple corrections to the score, and so I had written a few notes before we even had a rehearsal, and I would go to the bassoon player to give her a note, and she's like, but I haven't played a note yet. I said, I'm just taking out a slur. Not a problem. But anyway, the conducting fellows are so helpful for me for reminding me of the little things that are going by so quick that I can then help get those solved, and always increasing the quality of our performances for you, which is our whole goal, is to have the highest quality performance for everybody. So let's open up to some questions. I know you must have lots. Yes, one in the back.
I just didn't hear the end of the second question.
I think the second question was he heard reminiscence of the Brook violin concerto in the...
Yes, absolutely. Well, I believe in the Scotch tunes that he took from, it's originally written for violin. And he didn't even alter the keys, as I mentioned earlier on. And what you heard on the recordings is exactly how those Scotch tunes were continued to be executed in the public, in taverns, and so forth, in gatherings. And Brooke used the exact same material to write his concerto. To answer your second question, yes, I think Brooke, Brooke is Brooke. He's got his signature way of composing. He loves chords. He loves this kind of papam rhythm in all of his music. In his first concerto, in the Brooke Scottish Fantasy, he's a very melodic composer, very romantic as well. So that is his signature in both of these pieces.
And I just thought of something interesting about these two pieces. Both Brooke and not the other concerto, but Brooke and Samuel Coleridge Taylor both tended to sell their pieces outright, and they both regretted it greatly because their pieces sold very, very well, and they didn't get any more money.
Yeah, not the best fortune, but for example, Brooke wrote 3 violin concertos, and the first one became the most popular and it's most celebrated. And to this day, it's I think the signature piece of his entire collection of what he wrote, and that was sold completely outright, and he never got any of the profits of that. No royalties, nothing. I don't know about the Scottish Fantasy, though, actually.
Yeah, I don't know about the Scottish Fantasy, but I know that the same thing happened with Coleridge Taylor, that he sold his pieces outright and didn't get any money. George.
I enjoyed your foot tapping. And I'm sure it's not in the score, but I encourage you to do it because it makes it so authentic.
It came naturally.
Yeah.
I want to start having a jam session.
It's very good, very good.
There's a hand over here.
Could you tell us about your instrument?
Yes, this is a special treat. This is a Stradivarius that was made in 1709. I recently acquired it on loan about a year and a half ago from the government of Japan. Originally the government of Japan, which created a foundation called the Nippon Music Foundation, which has been privatized since. But it is a beautiful instrument made in 1709. It's called the Engelmann Stradivarius violin. It is part of the golden period of when Stradivarius made some of his best works. And I think the hue of this violin is also very golden. It's beautiful. And I love the direct qualities of this instrument. It's it's not a bright instrument, but it's extremely powerful. And it has, I think of it like very tiger-like qualities to it. It can bite, but it's also very soft and beautiful at the same time.
Yes, we've got one back here.
Timmy,
Hi.
I caught your clip playing Mozart in Vienna, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. And I wonder what violin were you using, and what bow were you using at that time, and have you come across any modern instrument, both a violin, bow, made in the last 50 years or so, that can come close to what you do with these fine harmonies instruments?
Wow, hey, Don, nice to see you again. It's amazing that you, in that video, which was just released a couple days ago, I used a different violin, and that's also on loan to me. That's a Guarneri del Gesù, made in 1741. It's a beautiful instrument. It's currently at the workshop right now because there's a lot of structural issues with that instrument. It's a beautiful instrument that doesn't have much damage to the front and the back plate. Stradivarius and Guarneri del Gesù are kind of the gold standard of violin making since the 1700s. The bow I use is a modern bow, and I still use it. I've had it since I was about 15, 16 years old, and I've tried many other bows, old ones, new ones, and for some reason I think because I develop a lot of my technique around that time, even though it's nothing really quite special, it is the one tool that I just can't find another one for some reason. In terms of modern instrument, yes, I have a modern instrument that I recently acquired, and it is made by a violin maker based out of South Carolina, Kurt Widenhouse, and it is a fantastic instrument. It's beautiful, it is powerful, it's got the qualities of, I think it could blow out many, many older fine instruments. The thing about modern versus old instruments is that I think especially a really good modern instrument, it tends to actually play a lot better than most older instruments. That is my observation, just because the actual composition of the violin itself. There's much more technology that was put into it, much more precise. The structure of the instrument can work on an operational level much better and more efficiently. I think of it very much as a comparison of Carnegie Hall versus a brand new concert hall, right? So there's something about Carnegie Hall that is very unique, very special. It creates a sound that is just so authentic, and I would say it's got a history to it as well, and a glamour, and just the whole atmosphere of it is fantastic. But there is a lot of structural issues with a building that is that old, that constantly needs repair. So even with this instrument, I do bring it to a shop almost every 3 months to get repaired. Something always cracks, something breaks. So that is kind of the downside to it. But at the same time, it is constantly being repaired, which means it's always at optimal shape. The new instruments, we've found ways to avoid all of these issues that older instruments have. Much better cutting of the wood, better glue, and so forth. It doesn't have the history, but it will continue to do so, I think, as time goes by. So yeah, it's really interesting to have the opportunity to try these instruments, modern versus a Stradivarius versus a Guarneri del Gesù, and they all have such strong qualities, and it's part of the fun of being a violinist.
And one of the challenges, because you've won international competitions, and so you have access to these instruments. But we think of our average orchestral player, and they've got to afford a good instrument too. And so it's a challenge, particularly with string players, how to people buy an instrument instead of buying a house, or instead of buying a car. It's because they're just very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So have your children play flute.
The newer the better, or the viola.
No, violas are still expensive. I think we have time for one more question, one or two more. Yes.
Do you choose the instrument you will use based on what repertoire you're going to play in a concert?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly why I brought this instrument, because I know this hall. It's a beautiful hall. It's a nice size. It's not too big. It's not too small. If this hall was smaller, I would probably have used my Guarneri del Gesù. It's got a very unique and round sound to it, but it doesn't project. This violin has the nice sweet spot between just being having that filter in the sound and yet being able to project, but no bigger than this hall. And my modern instrument, I would bring to a much bigger theater if it was a black box concert hall, because it does cut very well into a very difficult, challenging concert hall. So I base it, I picked the instrument based on the concert hall, actually, more so than the repertoire.
One last question, if anybody has one. Yes.
When you say that's on, the Stradivarius is on loan, is there a loan period, like
This one is 7 years.
7 years?
Yes, so I'm in my second year right now.
And by design, does it go to someone else, or can you renew that loan after 7 years?
This one, unfortunately, I cannot renew after 7 years, from my understanding, as of the current rules right now.
Yeah. And that's the other wall that violinists hit, because I remember when Robert McDuffie hit this wall, is that often you can get an instrument, but for only a certain number of years, and then there are enough places you can go, but when you've been through all of them, at some point you do have to get your own instrument, right?
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I might have to, find creative ways.
Creative ways, but it is always a challenge. But we are so lucky to have you here.
Thank you,
And you all
everyone.
need to get his autograph, because he's really going places, and we're very, very excited about this concert. So tell your friends that there's still time to buy tickets. You heard all those gorgeous folk melodies, unusual pieces. I think I mentioned that when I asked the orchestra, pretty much everybody in the orchestra has not played any of these pieces before. A few have played the Scottish Fantasy. I think 2 had played the Bambula. Nobody played the Amy Beach. I didn't ask about Scottish Fantasy, but they are so excited to bring this music to you, because they love to play new things too. It's a challenge for them. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll
Thank
see you
you.
at the concert. Thanks.